Call the Marathon County Board of Supervisors to order, please. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Please remain standing. Following the Pledge of Allegiance will be a silent moment of reflection. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Have the reading of the notice, please.
The organizational meeting of the Marathon County Board of Supervisors, composed of 38 members, will convene at the Marathon County Courthouse Assembly Room, 500 Forest Street, Wausau, on Tuesday, June 20th, 2023, at 7 p.m. to consider the following matters. The agenda was duly signed and posted.
Thank you. And I would like to request everyone, please silence your cell phones and any other electronic devices as to not be an interruption to the board meeting tonight. We'll proceed to roll call and ask everyone, please sign in. And thank you. I'd like to welcome all of the visitors that we have with us this evening, including the viewing audience, and thank you for your interest in Marathon County government. We'll move on to education presentations and/or reports. And first up is item number 7, standing committee chairpersons or designees. Any announcements or reports by standing committee chairs or designees? Okay, we will move on then to consent agenda. Items C8 through item C13B. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Rosenberg, seconded by Supervisor Langenhahn. Any discussion? Any discussion on the consent agenda items? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Although we'll proceed to vote using the system. Do we have anybody on WebEx? Supervisor Boots, can you vote, or do you want to provide your vote verbally?
Aye.
Aye, thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. And we will move on to the next item on the agenda. Item D, appointments. We have the 2024 Rules Review Committee. Item D, 14. What is your pleasure? Yes, you can read it, please.
Appointment of the County Board Rules Review Committee. Upon approval of the board, appoint the following to serve on the County Board Rules Review Committee for the 2024-2026 County Board term. County Supervisors Craig McEwen, David Baker, Chris Dickinson, Cody Hart, Jacob Langenhahn, John Robinson, and Rick Seefeld.
And we have a motion by Supervisor Leahy and seconded by Vice Chair McEwen. Any discussion? Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as we start moving forward with this, if any of the supervisors have any questions or comments that they would like or rules for us to review, please either speak to myself or one of the other task force members, or send an email, because if you do have concerns of any rules that you want us to review, please let us know, and we will discuss it at rules. And like I said, it's important to get the information from all the supervisors. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Boots?
Aye.
Thank you. And we will proceed. And the motion is carried unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to ordinances, the creation of the Marathon County Tax Incremental Financing Task Force. Ordinance 0-20-23, item E15. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen and seconded by Supervisor Robinson. Any discussion? Supervisor Sherfinsky.
Thank you, Chair. My question on this is, we at the educational meeting, we brought up the question of sunset and of timeline, and I do not see that addressed in the ordinance as written. So I guess I would like to ask what the intention was, if Supervisor Langenhan could address that.
Okay, Supervisor Langenhan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. One of the concerns that I heard last week, Thursday night, and I plan on speaking later on this as well, but in regards to the piece about having a limitation on this particular work group and having a clear set of expectations. And given that, I think to alleviate some of those concerns, it would be appropriate to place an amendment or adopt an amendment for the task force charter. So at this time, Mr. Chair, if it would be germane, I'd like to offer an amendment to the task force charter, specifically under 205 sub 14 sub G. I'd like to add a 3, and I'd like it to read as follows. This task force shall dissolve on April 1st, 2024. Thank you.
Okay, is there a second? Second by Supervisor Robinson. So just a second, and I'll have the clerk make the changes. And then does anyone wish to discuss the amendment that is being offered? The amendment puts into place a sunset of April 1st, 2024. Good. Can we move that to put that as get it on the vote? To vote on. Okay, yep. Okay, Supervisor Sherfinsky.
Thank you, Chair. I see now that open meetings is caught up. With the addition of the sunset provision, I think that makes this much easier to support. I think that we have a lot of learning that we can do relative to the TID and TIF issue. It's an open question just how much authority and how much influence the county board we can have over the creation of the districts via the municipalities. But I think it makes sense for us to be involved and investigate the matter. So I will support this.
Okay, we're talking about right now just the discussion about the amendment, and that is to create the addition of a sunset. And we'll get to the overall subject of the task force.
And
as soon as
I
we
support
vote.
the sunset.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I just have I guess I just wanted some clarification here. Supervisor Longenhan submitted the amendment to include the word shall sunset. I guess if we end up in a situation where we needed to extend it for a set amount of time, and another, whether it's a month or two, would having the word shall in there, would that prohibits us from doing so? I'm just kind of curious here. I don't want us to. I agree with putting a sunset, but I also don't want it to restrict us and forcing us to have it to closing it before a time period. I guess maybe that's a question for Corporation Counsel as well.
Corporation Counsel address the question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So if this ordinance were adopted with the sunset provision, and the board determined later on that it wished to extend the life of that task force, the board could vote to do so by amending the ordinance. If it wished to do so, that would require a 2/3 majority vote, just as creation of the task force would. So that's an option.
Thank you.
Other note that I would make is that April 1st, the official sunset date that has been placed on the amendment, sunsets for this board will sunset effectively April, at the installation of the next board. And so the board could adopt, if it wanted to, at that time, the creation of the TID task force, if it chose to, when it adopts its rules to govern itself during its term. Supervisor Longenhan.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to highlight that April 1st was chosen primarily for that particular reason. So after the concerns that were brought up last Thursday night, I'm just trying to account for them. That's why I'm offering this. I would hope you all would support them. And if it did get to that point, and I'm not saying it will because we haven't seen anything yet, we haven't even created this body yet. That's still up to this board to determine. If the board wants to continue those discussions, they can simply take them up after that April 1st date. Thank you.
Okay, any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the amendment. The amendment is to create a sunset of April 1st, 2024. Let's proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Thank you, Supervisor Boots. Aye. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. And now to the motion as amended, the creation of the TIF task force as amended with the sunset date. Any further discussion? Supervisor Sandulski.
Thank you, Chairman. Honestly, there's numerous factors to these TID districts. I got questions. Well, a lot of the stuff was brought up last week, but some of the questions are, why is the county looking for a task force for TIDs, which is under state jurisdiction by the state legislator? In comparison, there's another massive issue we have that is also under state jurisdiction, which is this massively highly destructive corporate wind turbines. Because they are over the 99 megawatts, they are under state jurisdiction government. These corporate wind farms will also have massive implications on the people living within these districts or within these townships. Yet there is no task force or resolution or anything to consider to look out for the citizens in the western towns of Marathon County. I am totally in favor of bringing this issue, the TIDs, before the entire board, invite business owners in these TIDs, community leaders, local government, etc., to speak on how the TIDs impact the communities. On the same token, I'd also like to see more light brought to the corporate wind turbines at a full board level. Both are under state jurisdiction. Maybe as a board we can set resolutions to the state to look into this at a full board level. So I will be voting no for this. Is another unnecessary task force is the TIDs task force. We can get things done much more efficiently at the full board rather than going through a task force and a standing committee and then to the full board. I'd also be happy to hear more presentations firsthand from users of the TIDs districts. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The only question I had is, on the resolution, it states that the fiscal impact is none. I'd like a definition of what you mean by fiscal impact, because there certainly will be costs associated with resources meeting, whether it be reimbursements or staff spending their time in meetings or whatever those things might be over the next year and a half. So what would be the definition of fiscal impact?
Corp Counsel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So generally, when I'm drafting a resolution and I'm looking at adding a fiscal impact note, I'm just looking at, does this require an allocation of money by the board in some manner? This, because it didn't, that's why I put none. So that's what I've traditionally done when I'm drafting resolutions, and I don't draft them all, but that's what I did in this case.
So as a follow-up, could I ask for kind of an estimate of what we think the costs might be with these groups meeting? Is it 5 figures? Is that fair? Are we talking, I hope that it makes sense where I'm kind of going with that. I would assume it's not going to be 6 figures, but I assume it's also not going to be 4 figures, so.
Supervisor Robinson?
I'll try to answer that as best I can. I don't think we anticipated that the citizen members and the non-county board members would not be subject to reimbursements. And there's some certain appropriation for the county board, so we're not anticipating that there would be significant cost associated with this. I would think that it would be potentially even in the 3 figures.
Supervisor Longenhan?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my fellow colleagues. I think you can all tell that this issue is very important to me. So I'd just like to take some time this evening to continue to urge you all to support the creation of this task force. I'm not going to go through all of my figures from last Thursday night. I'm hoping that those of you that were absent could find the time to take a look at that YouTube video. I am going to go through a couple of the highlights, though. As I mentioned, Marathon County has 40 active tax incremental districts. There are only 6 that are scheduled to be closed this decade. 13 of those 40 have had their closing deadlines extended, and we have had one TID in place since 1994, before I was born. The total amount of value that is lost to this county in the increment for all of these tax incremental districts is $1,070,800,800. I don't think that number changed since last Thursday night. As I previously stated, as stewards of public funds, we need to do a better job at understanding how we are supposed to operate in this environment, given that we have $1 billion in that increment. There are also a number of other concerns that were raised last Thursday night. I'm going to do my best right now to address them, but I don't want to take too much time of this board. I took enough last Thursday night. So the one thing that keeps getting brought up is the Joint Review Board and the role that that plays in the creation of tax incremental districts. Here's some background. You can find information on the Joint Review Board in Wisconsin Statute 66.1105 sub 4M. The statute that explains who makes up the Joint Review Board and its responsibilities is particularly that statute. Broadly speaking, with some exceptions, and due to me not being an attorney and with limited time on my hands, really you can boil this down to that the Joint Review Board consists of 1 representative from the school district, 1 representative from the technical college, 1 representative from the village or city, 1 public member, and the last one and the most important one for our discussions is that there is 1 representative from the county. So it is in state statute that we have an interest on this Joint Review Board. Now, why is the Joint Review Board important? The reason why it's important is because before the creation of a tax incremental district can take place, that Joint Review Board has to approve it. Before any amendments can be made to that tax incremental district's plan, the Joint Review Board must approve it. Currently, the individual that we have sitting on the Joint Review Board is our finance director. And I think that as policymakers, it would be wise to, at the very least with this task force, to provide direction as to how we want certain criteria prioritized when decisions are made on the Joint Review Board. And to be clear, that is not a negative review of how our current representative is representing the county on that board. That's not the case. It is simply a gap that I believe that this county board must fill. Because if we're sending a delegate to that joint review board to make decisions that have a great impact on this county, and when I say great, I mean monumental, not great and woohoo. I'm just saying that I think the county board needs to take some leadership here and provide some direction to that representative. The next thing I want to address is that there was a lot of discussion regarding the sort of the method that's used to look at tax incremental financing. And really there are three things in front of us from what I've been hearing with these discussions. There's to use a task force, there's to use a standing committee, and there's to provide some discussion and education at the full board level. And as we heard last Thursday night under public comment, a standing committee tried to take up this matter in the past. To be honest, I don't know why it failed. That might have even been before my time. But I do want to say that this county board should not ignore history. And if you think about the work that our standing committees do, they're tasked with a lot of different things. So to give this topic, which I'll say again, $1 billion resides in that increment, to provide this topic the full attention that it deserves, I believe that a task force should be preferential rather than having any sort of education or discussion at the standing committee. In addition to that, a standing committee typically does not have citizen members. With a task force, you have some flexibility to bring in appointed experts and professionals from the public to have a say in the discussion and potential recommendations that might come out of that group. Similarly, an educational briefing to the full board, I also would believe would not be appropriate because if you think about it, the method of choice there would essentially be an expert coming in, talking to the board. They're not talking with the board. They wouldn't be able to provide any sort of input on the discussion itself because we have 38 members here, and they would not be a voting member in that case. And also, Mr. Chair, there was also some discussion as far as when a task force is necessary, and I want to say two things with that. One piece of discussion had to do with the county's ability to directly address a problem and the county's need to address the problem. I think we have a significant interest in directly influencing that joint review board because of our county representative on it. In addition to that, as I mentioned earlier, and I'm going to keep saying it, we have over $1 billion that is locked up into that increment. And simply ignoring these observations, in my opinion, is frankly ridiculous. With that being said, Mr. Chair, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on this topic because I know we have a long agenda ahead of us tonight, but I really do believe this is a matter of common sense. We need to bring other decision makers into the room to have a good discussion on tax incremental financing. As I mentioned numerous times last week, I'm not here to condemn tax incremental financing or the creation of TIDs. In fact, we need to bring in the people that say that they are a good method for economic development, so that they can better understand the county's role when these items are created. There's a lot of practical application for this county to be gained from the creation of this group. That being said, thank you all for listening to me, and thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Opal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was listening while I was up at my cabin. I was on the internet, and I heard most of the discussion. And it seemed like the axes were out, you know, for the TID or TIF, whatever you want to call it. What I see, and I remember back when shared revenues was a issue. They cut back on the local governments. Who stood to gain? The state. The state didn't really cut our taxes that much, but then the local communities had to dig in a little more and a little more. Now, this almost sounds like the same thing because I heard someone from the public say, let's cut it back from 15 to 12%. Well, now, some of these communities, when you look at the investment that's involved in some of these TIDs, may not even want to try it, okay? And I haven't heard anything about the ones that are really successful. All I've heard is the failures. Yeah, there's some failures out there, but there are also some successes. I guess I look at at it as maybe we're griping about what kind of tax money we're losing, and I don't know if that's really accurate. I haven't heard about the tax money that we're gaining. And you got to figure sales tax in there and everything. One has to remember that this board, the county board, is not we are not into development. We depend on the communities to develop. That's where we get our monies. So with that, you imagine you can take from what I've been saying, I'm a solid no on this. Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's several reasons why I feel this is a good idea. First of all, the struggles we've been having with our budgets, okay? And I don't disagree with a lot of the comments that were made last week, but I believe that Marathon County is entitled to all the taxes that belongs to Marathon County. Not saying that the TIFs don't offer any benefits to Marathon County, but I just think that some of these TIFs have been extended and extended. One from 1994 from Schofield. I'm not picking on Schofield, but I think the Marathon County Board should at least be interested in how these TIFs work and how the Joint Review Committee works as far as extending TIDs. I don't even know if a TID was ever turned down by this review board. I don't know if there's any documentation of that. However, I just think that the information that this task force could bring forward to the Marathon County Board would help us have a discussion. I know we can't control the state legislature makes these laws, but when constituents call us and talk to us about TIDs and TIFs, at least we can be somewhat informed. And like I said, we have never, that I can recall, talked about TIFs before this task force came up. And like I said, that's what this is going to generate is a discussion. I'm not against TIDs or TIFs. I'm just saying that I think the more information that the Marathon County Board has will help us answer questions to our constituents and maybe have a discussion with our legislators on how these TIFs are affecting Marathon County and the taxpayers in Marathon County. I just think, I don't know what this can hurt, having a discussion. I believe, like I said, we wouldn't have talked about this had this task force not came up. And like I said, I know you can find information on there. Several supervisors gave information on how to look this information for TIDs up, and I appreciate that. Like I said, I didn't know that. I tell you the truth, I'm not really well tuned to how TIDs operate and how they get reviewed by the Joint Review Board. So I just think, what is it going to hurt? Give us information. If we don't like the information, if we can use some of the information, so be it. And like I said, it's not going to hurt anything. So I'm supporting it, and like I said, I would ask the rest of the supervisors to also support it. Thank you.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you were asked by one of your constituents, how much additional tax levy are you paying to cover the TID development, could you answer them? Some TIFs have started out to be 27 years long, but many of them are extended to 37 years. Say you buy a home and you're 30 years old at the start of that TIF, or the TID. You will be subsidizing the development in that TID for 37 years. You will be 68 years old before you get a return on that investment. Do you know of any other investment you're being asked to make that you have to wait 37 years to get a return? The services that are provided in these tax increment districts by county government, the school district, NTC, are still required, yet the money isn't there. The money goes only for economic development in the TID. That means that cost burden is being shifted to everyone outside of the TID. Municipalities are allowed to levy taxes for the property in the TID on everyone outside of the TID. It's permitted by law. It's not required. So some municipalities may not do that. Some may. But the fact is that our constituents are paying for the development in the TID for an extended period of time. I think it's worthy to have a discussion as to how we understand and discuss the economic development tool. It doesn't mean all TIDs are bad, but I would ask you, could you answer that question for your constituent? How much more am I paying to subsidize the tax increment district in my municipality? Thank you.
Supervisor Sherfinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to add my my vote to Supervisor Marshall, Supervisor McEwen. I will be a yes vote on this, and the reason being is we come back to this $1 billion or a little bit more of incremental tax valuation, which is not on the county tax rolls. That's part of the process of a TID-TIF. But we have no real policy, and we don't even have the knowledge and the understanding to effectively create a county policy in response to the individual questions that may come up with any one of the individual TIF districts. And each one may demand a different answer in a different direction. But what we don't have, we clearly have a lot of discussion going back and forth. So that, in my mind, is a good reason why we ought to move forward with the task force to gather that information. That task force is going to produce a report and document and inform the board. That way, at the end of this process, we will have knowledge to be able to thoughtfully implement a policy. Today, we're, relatively speaking, have our heads, not willingly or unwillingly in the sand, but we're somewhat ignorant of all the data. And we need to get that data, and when you have $1 billion question in front of you, we don't know would that valuation have happened with or without the TIFs? No one has any idea. So this is a chance for us to do our due diligence, and for that reason, I encourage everyone to vote yes.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'll just state to you, maybe it's not 5 figures, it's certainly more than 3 figures. I mean, just having a meeting in itself, the amount of time that's going to be spent, having staff members involved, it is resource. Okay? A task force meets, they spend time, they broadcast the meeting, you have staff here doing work. It's resource, it's money. It could be used on something else. So it's not 3 figures, maybe it's not 5 figures, it's certainly, there is a cost there. Number 2, how many of us have had a person come up to us and ask us about our local TIF or TID? I mean, I'm not really asking for a show of hands, but thank you for that. Not saying it's not a problem. Is it a hot issue? Is it a major problem that needs to be attacked, addressed by us? Again, it not being our jurisdiction. The third thing I would just say about this wonderful $1 billion that exists, I don't think this task force is going to collect $1 billion for us. I don't think they're going to come on March 31st and say, guess what? If you do these policies, you're going to get that money. So I'd be interested to know, does anyone have any idea what kind of money we're going to collect, if anything? I would venture to say chances are it's closer to 3 figures than $1 billion.
Supervisor Rosenberg, please.
Yeah, I'll be voting for this. I want to pick on that $1 billion plus number. Sans any TIFs, I speculate that that would be a considerably smaller number. Those projects would be considerably smaller, or they wouldn't exist at all. And I don't think it's fair to use that number going forward, that when you create, some of that development won't happen at all. Some of them fail, but some of the development won't happen, and it won't be as big, and it won't be as well done. So I'd lose the billion-plus figure.
Supervisor Limmer, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to repeat a little bit of what I said last time. I agree that $1 billion is a little bit irrelevant because if we didn't have TIDS and TIF, we may not have much of that development at all. There's nothing stopping us right now from engaging with municipalities to talk about TID on our own. There's nothing stopping us from asking WEDC or Synergy or some other group to come here and educate us. There's nothing stopping us from giving our representative for the Joint Review Board guidance. I think that should be happening in our EED meeting, probably our HRFP meeting, maybe even the executive committee meeting, but I don't think we need a task force to make any of those things happen. I think if we have a task force, we may wind up alienating ourselves from the municipalities that we rely on to make us the healthiest, safest, and most prosperous county in the state. So I am voting no and hope that we do have some education brought to this board and some good, hard discussion at the 3 committees that I mentioned.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
Thank you. Let me just try to explain where that $1 billion comes from. So when you create a tax increment finance district, you freeze the value, or you have your base value of the property at the time of the creation of the TIF. You then have the increment, or the amount of growth that is associated with that development. That $1 billion is that increment. So the TIDs have been successful in generating additional revenue. Now that increment, that $1 billion, goes to pay not for the services of the local services, police, fire, others, county services, others. It goes to pay off the debt associated with the creation of the TIF and the public investments in that for the roads and other infrastructure that generated. So when you create a tax increment district, many times it's needed. It's in blighted areas. It's a needed catalyst. Corporations are very good at asking for things from local units of government under developer agreements and others, and we haven't always had the best checks and balances in place to sort of temper those appetites or to evaluate those requests. The reason that this is before us is we've looked at this for 3+ years at the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee and have struggled with how do we go about evaluating that? What directions do we provide to our member on that? Who should that member be? Should it be our finance director? Should it be the chair of the EEDC? Should it be someone else from the county board? And what criteria should they apply as a voting member representing this county in evaluating those TIFs and TIF amendments and extensions? We've had 13 out of the 40 tax increment districts which have been extended beyond their original life. Was there due diligence? Was there a strong evaluation of those? We have donor TIFs where they could be going back on the tax rolls, but instead they're supporting other TIFs within the community. Not to say that those are wrong, but just saying that we currently lack a policy or a procedure under which we evaluate those extensions, requests, and other things. We've done a great job in moving businesses from the Wisconsin River to the industrial park without providing mass transit. Should that be one of the factors that you look at? How do we get people there? Are they paying minimum or livable wages? Those are criteria that we could be asking and I think should be asking when those TIDs are created. What is the public benefit of the creation of the district? What is the likelihood for it to succeed? There are times where we just need to do things to save neighborhoods. And nobody's saying stop doing that. What we're saying is by what criteria do we evaluate that? Who do we bring to the table? We are talking about how we use our vote as a county, as a member of that under the statutes to do that. But if you take that $1 billion, we increase our levy limit by that amount. When they create the TID, we can tax upon that growth. We just can't tax that new property. We then shift the burden of that onto the remaining tax base. And there may be merit to doing that for the short-term gain. But I think we ought to be looking at what criteria, how often, how much, what duration, et cetera, in evaluating that and developing it. This task force can get into those issues and make recommendations and engage those other communities and have them at the table, all of which will be positive at the end of the day.
Supervisor Langenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to make a couple more points, which is that there is a danger in generalization, saying that you know something for certain, but you don't have any data to back it up. And a lot of this value has been locked in at base for a long time. And until I see actual numbers proving whether or not the sales tax and job creation eclipsed the property tax that could have been fair distributed across the $1 billion, I'm simply not going to believe it. Not until I have somebody make a compelling argument with data in front of me to address that particular point. The other comment I want to make is that I know that we are in a, not to sound cheesy, but we are in a business of relationships. That is what we are. We are connected to our communities. We work with our communities to accomplish our goals and objectives. I certainly don't want to alienate any of them. That's why I believe that the purpose of the task force can be better realized with collaboration amongst those 20 some odd communities that are effectively utilizing TIFs right now. The ones that are utilizing them right now should be brought into these conversations. They need their viewpoints to be heard. We shouldn't be, we shouldn't be stuck in an echo chamber when it comes to the use of the tax incremental districts. So, and as far as what's being fair, I could talk quite a bit about that tax burden shifting, but I think we all need to do ourselves an internal review of our priorities and our objectives on this board when we think about areas beyond those TIDs that are bearing the brunt of this burden. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Van Cray, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Is staff able to put the open meetings screen up before we vote?
We can.
Thank you.
Supervisor Overbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I want to talk about is the TIDs and the but-for clause as far as why a TID is used. It was originally developed as far as a way to give urban areas a means to develop on an equal basis with greenfields outside that do not require redevelopment. That was the original goal of a TID. And with that, it's also meant to be a strong incentive to get the first project, second project, and then lessen that burden as far as development back for a district that is suffering. So it's established in that area. It's all based upon value within that area and decreasing value, and you do a bunch of analysis to figure out why you should create a TID. And the whole thing is you lock in that value at the base rate. Take the Wausau Mall for one instance. That went from $33 million down to $12 million, down to almost zero. Now that's the base value of that property. So we've lost $33 million worth of taxable value on an existing building by removing that function from that building. Those taxpayers that owner was still on the dime for as far as paying taxes on that. That was removed. Now it will go way up in value, but now it's going to be locked in for 27, 30 years, with that value not available to any of the entities to improve our schools, improve our district as far as roads or all the infrastructure that has to go around the city. So tax increment districts are great as far as development, but they're not meant to last a lifetime. And a lot of cities have now looked at, well, can we do it for 10 years? A 10-year payback, and then we start leapfrogging different TIDs as far as it's generating revenue for municipalities and school districts on a periodic basis. That's not that 30 years. And I've seen them when I was on the city of Wausau, the extensions that just continue to go on. And we actually closed half a district so we could get $450,000 out to assist with the budget one year. And that was a lot of work to get that through, but it actually helped the city going forward. So what you really need to do is come up with a better way to use TID. It's gotten out of hand. It's become a vehicle to just generate money for one entity while others have to find ways of subsidizing their operations. And I think if you look at that, TIDs are not bad. They create development. But what they've done is create municipalities that are now competing against each other. This municipality will give me this much. This other one will give me this one. You got the developers working that way of doing business. So, I mean, TIDs are good, but I think there's a lot of work to creating an understanding. I saw it on the city council. I see it on the county board as far as not understanding what that relationship is and what that investment can do as far as helping the city pay for infrastructure. I mean, TIDs really should provide the infrastructure in which to plug in buildings, not buildings being plugged into existing networks within the city. It's really to create an environment that you can create an experience so your city becomes more than what it was before. TID projects also you ask them to do more with their project than they would normally do. It's not meant to develop a gas station. It's not meant to do ordinary things. It's meant to create that environment to move forward and build the city. And I think if you take a look at that, the task force can do a lot of work to say, this is what we want to see. This is the economic development. This is what makes Marathon County prosperous. But if nobody understands it, then there's not any good ideas to move forward. And I think the task force can bring forth ideas to say, let's leapfrog them. Let's start TID 1 on 5 years, do TID 2 on 10 years, and then as they mature, it's like taking CDs for most people. It's taking that money, moving forward, and reinvesting it. And I think that's the power of TID. It's to give you that strength to develop properties that would not move forward. Like the riverfront. It was in need of development. But now you should be looking for higher and higher development because the infrastructure is there. Why do you have to pay a developer to come down on a riverfront? Would you ask that in Minocqua? Building a home there? Why don't we give everyone $50,000 to build a $400,000 home? Because that home's going to be there probably longer than some of them commercial buildings. So, you got to look at how you can get money out of this. So it should be almost treated like a revolving loan fund, that it continues to just generate more and more development instead of waiting and keep on feeding a project in the 27th year. Why should you fund a project in a district that's already been there for 27 years? That should be someplace I want to develop because they've created such an experience and such an environment that I want my building there. I want my business there, and I'll pay to do it. And there's a study out of Chicago that explains all this, where they actually looked at the $1 billion question, or even more down there, but it looked at how it affected the tax base and what property, and they were starting to pick up the bill because it's loans, money that municipalities don't have. They're borrowing it. And as that interest rate goes up, so does your costs for long term. So I guess I would like to see the task force develop to get those ideas, put them forward, because they're going to all be positive. They're going to help Wausau grow, Marathon County grow, and it's going to spin off. To change the TID law, that's a state level concern. I mean, that's a difficult one because if Marathon County doesn't offer the TIDs, Wood County will, or Portage County. It's going to be competition for that big employer, what the jobs are created. Those should all be criteria that are looked at. And we somewhat developed that when I was on a city council was a questionnaire about what you're going to provide. And the city of Middleton has a good site talking about TIDs and development. And there's a lot of other ones, you know, in the southern part of the state that have learned the lessons. So I hope that everyone supports this and at least gives a chance to get those ideas out there. Because it's not to shut down TIDs. It's how to find out how to do them better. Thank you.
Supervisor Caffelli, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, like I said on Thursday, I think we're putting the cart before the horse here. I'd rather see us, like Supervisor Limmer said, get educated on this first, like Supervisor Overbeck just kind of educated us all on this. And I think that if we take a look, and I had a long conversation with the administrator of Marathon City. He's concerned about this task force. He thinks it's going to alienate the municipalities that use the TIDs. He thinks that, and to Supervisor Langenhan's point, we don't want to alienate anybody. We're not here to do that. We're here to build relationships. I think this task force will tear those relationships apart at the beginning because it's really not clear outside of saying that we want more information so we can bring that to our director of finance and have her go to the board and bring those thoughts forward. But why don't we bring our director of finance in first at the committee level and have her explain what she actually does on that committee and how she comes up with her decisions. I would rather see that than put us, into a position where we're going to tear down relationships with our municipalities. So I'm against this. Thank you.
Supervisor Shafinsky.
Call the question.
Question's been called. Is there any objection to question being called? Is there a second to the question being called? Seconded by Supervisor Rosenberg. Just a second. So my clerk will get the proper nomenclature on question being called. We have one person in the queue, and that is Supervisor Lemmer. Supervisor Lemmer will be able to address the board. I know it's a 2/3 majority requirement. Supervisor Lemmer, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I thought we had to vote.
Pardon me?
I thought we had to vote on calling the question.
No, we will. You're still going to be allowed to address the board regardless.
Newbie here.
It's just a matter of whether we go back to it. Okay. Discussion.
So really what I just want to respond to a couple of things when Supervisor Langenhan talked about the data that he hasn't seen the information on sales tax, et cetera. When I spoke with somebody from WEDC, she said that'll take decades of financials to analyze because you have to look at sales tax for the years that the TIF was open or has been open. There are other things that you can't even quantify, and so it's not really a simple just look at sales tax revenues because again there's other benefits. I also feel like, I don't know, I just heard this saying at a conference I was at last weekend, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And when I look at the membership, there's 9 members, only 4 would be from the community. And that's not a good representation of all of the municipalities and the sizes and the types. So the venues that already exist, I was just at a meeting today put on by Synergy and the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. There were probably 40 different municipalities from different areas represented there, and that would be a perfect venue to have a collegial discussion on the point of view for the county versus the municipality and how we could work better together to make TIF better. As far as what Supervisor Oberbeck said, which I really appreciate, I don't know how to make it better outside of the state, but it, to me, is forging those relationships, and so that would be sitting down in a symposium type discussion to listen to each other and to communicate with each other and figure out a way to pull in the same direction. So again, I don't know that the task force with 9 members is big enough. I think it needs to be bigger.
Okay, we are ready to vote with the motion to call the question. And again, everybody understand, a yes vote will, with a 2/3 majority, will end discussion, and we will proceed to vote on the main motion. A no vote, meaning a defeat of the 2/3 majority, will keep discussion moving forward. All right, everybody is ready to vote. We will proceed to vote. Supervisor
Boots, aye.
Aye. Thank you, Supervisor. And we'll proceed. And the motion is passed, and we will now proceed to vote on the main motion as amended, and that is to create the Tax Incremental Financing Task Force with a sunset date. The amendment created the sunset date of April 1st, 2024. Everybody clear on what you're voting on? Okay, we'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Thank you, Supervisor Boots. Supervisor Seibert.
Won't leave me vote. Yes, says, oh, something isn't right.
Do you want to give your vote verbally?
Aye.
Supervisor Seibert, aye. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is passed. We will proceed to the next item on the agenda. Human Resources, Finance and Property Committee resolution, a resolution establishing the 2024 budget priorities and guidelines. Resolution 24-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Vensky and a second by Vice Chair McEwen. Discussion, Supervisor Sandulski.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. As our constituents are being squeezed tighter with higher inflations, rising interest rates, and rising cost of living, we as a county board need to be more wise with the resources we are afforded to. We need to be fiscally responsible to the citizens we serve. In light of that, I want to propose an amendment to Resolution 2823, the budget priorities, capping the levy limit increase to a maximum of 2% above the 2023 county tax levy.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Who's the second, please? Supervisor Baker with a second. Any discussion on the amendment? Supervisor Robinson.
Remember that our levy increases are subject to net new construction, and we never know what that is. It may be 2.1%, it may be 1.4%, but our increase annually is based upon that net new construction. The ultimate arbitrator of any budget is this body, and at the end of the day, you can set that rate. I just would urge caution, not knowing what the net new construction will be. I don't believe any TID districts are ending this year. There may be one next year, but those would all impact what our levy would be for the county. I think we have the most restrictive levy limits in the country. in the state of Wisconsin. And I think that those are adequate in keeping our levy in line, and it gives the administrator and others the ability to make those adjustments, taking into consideration inflation, as well as that net new construction.
Any other discussion? Supervisor Baker.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So it seems extremely likely to me that the budget priority resolution as written will lead to a budget this fall that includes substantial property tax increases without this amendment. As a result, voting for the budget priority resolution as it's written today is effectively voting to be presented with a budget with a substantial property tax increase this fall. I want to repeat that statement for clarity. Voting for the budget priority resolution as written today is effectively voting for a substantial property tax increase this fall. Why do I make this statement? Let's start with the whereas statement that states that the board prioritizes a stable, sustainable tax levy rate. If Administrator Leonard would please put up the Administrator's 2023 budget message on page 10. So, I don't know if you can see that, but basically, if you look at that table, you can see that historically the tax rate has not been stable in many years. It declined in most years from 2015 to 2023. Despite the decline in the tax rate, the average homeowner has faced a gradual increase in their tax bill due to the rise in home values. So what does the resolution mean by a stable, sustainable tax levy rate? Looking at the table, you can see that the rate has declined from 5.17 to 4.47 over the last 12 years, which is a decrease of about 70 cents. So would keeping the rate at 4.47 be a stable, sustainable rate? Or is the idea that we raise our rate back to the 5.17 range and keep it stable at that elevated rate? We can look at page 14 on the April 6th infrastructure packet. So we can see that there's a proposed rate increase of about 35 cents in the debt service tax levy from 2023 to 2024. That's an increase of about 8%. If we look at page 21 of the same packet, we can see that the proposed tax levy rate has increased about 55 cents in 2026 from the 2023 debt service rate. In 2023, the proposed average tax increase was 9.38%, which was ultimately reduced when it became obvious that a tax increase of this size was not acceptable to our board. Because we weren't aware of the increase until very late in the budget process, the finance director and the chair of HR Finance made a proposal to reduce the tax increase using reserves or fund balance, which we as a board unanimously approved. However, I believe it would be preferable to express our desire to avoid substantial tax increases early in the process as part of the budget priorities to give guidance to the administrator and the finance director as they are preparing the budget. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My only question, there was an amendment that was offered that HR Finance looked at regarding the fifth, now therefore it be resolved, that would said limit the increase in total tax levy to the increase in net new construction. Now we hear another amendment that's proposed that's talking about capping the levy at 2%, and now we're hearing HR Finance say, well, net new construction, which was just a comment. So I'm trying to get a clarification of which one is it? So we're going one way and it's rejected, it seems, to limit it to the net new construction, and now we say, well, let's go to the tax levy rate, limit that. Well, no, because net new construction. So I think there's a certain amount of people in the room that are looking for a good faith effort within the resolution to limit the amount of tax that's going to occur this budget cycle And it doesn't seem, however it's proposed, that it's going to go anywhere with that committee. And I'm just I'm looking for some guidance here, who can go ahead and figure this out, that we can come to a place that we can have a limited, sustainable tax upon the people in this county in this resolution. Thank you.
Supervisor Langenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to highlight a couple of things, which is I would caution the board going down this particular path. If there's a sudden emergency in our county, our hands would be effectively tied by doing something like this. I know it is only an assumption and we haven't adopted any sort of a levy yet, but I don't believe that anybody has a crystal ball in this room that they can tell what the sales tax figures are going to look like in the coming year. I should say, yeah, the sales tax assumptions for the coming year. I think we would be doing a disservice if we were to handicap ourselves below what that allowable levy is, and then we have to reduce our services for no reason, which, by the way, our residents would not be happy with anyway. The other thing I want to say is that if our net new construction increases by more than 2%, we've cannibalized our revenue source. And as stewards of this organization and the public funds, that's mismanagement. I'm not going to support that. I'd urge you all not to support this amendment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Forgive me if I don't have the wording exactly correct, but I would like to offer an amendment to where we have whereas the Marathon County Board adopted a budget development timeline that calls for the establishment of budget priority guidelines for the county administrator to consider when putting together a budget recommendation. I would like to amend that, the final clause, when putting together a budget recommendation that shall not exceed a 3% increase. Thank you.
Corp Counsel wants some clarification.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, Supervisor Sherfinsky, this is an amendment to the existing amendment to clarify that that language would be inserted in the whereas clause that you just identified at the end of the sentence?
If that is appropriate, yes.
Okay, there's an amendment to the amendment offered to change the 2% to 3%. Is there a second? Is there a second? Supervisor Wilhelm with the second. Just a second. The clerk needs time to be able to enter the amendment to the amendment. Just so everybody's clear, and another amendment will not be accepted. By our rules, two amendments, an amendment to an amendment is the only thing that is allowed. And so we will be voting at some point on the proposed second amendment to amend it to 3%. So majority. Okay, any discussion on the amendment to the amendment? I guess the only thing that I would remind the board is two things. First off, the county employees clearly face the same inflation factors that you and I do and the citizens of Marathon County do. On top of that, this board has approved bonding to fund a major renovation at North Central Healthcare. And we understand, or it's been presented to this board, the challenges that that entity is facing from a financial standpoint. And it is still our obligation to fund that debt. Last year, we took $10 million out of reserves to pay for highway projects. And we took out money out of reserves to fund the debt service. That's not sustainable long term. I repeat, $10 million plus 4 million, roughly, not 4, excuse me, 3 million for debt service for NCHC's debt out of reserves, and that's not sustainable long-term. The approach that the HR Finance Committee took was looking at a sustainable, reasonable debt or reasonable tax levy. That doesn't mean adding new positions, because that's clearly in one of the positions, not adding new positions. It's funding the obligations that we currently have. I urge people to consider, with the strictest tax levy limits that we have in the United States, all 3,069 counties, parishes, and boroughs have less restrictive levy limits than the state of Wisconsin does on the 72 counties in the state of Wisconsin. So, with that, I would be voting no on the amendment. Any further discussion? Supervisor Shafinsky.
I would like to remind the chair that this board did not approve the North Central Healthcare renovation. That was the previous board. Thank you.
You were accurate, but Marathon County Board of Supervisors did. Moving on, Supervisor Van Cray.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you clarify, we vote on the amendment to the amendment, and then we vote on the amendment, and then we vote no?
No. If the amendment to the amendment passes, that then supersedes the amendment.
Thank you.
Corp Counsel will address.
I think Supervisor Van Cray stated that correctly. So you vote on the amendment to the amendment first. If that passes, you still need to vote on the amendment as amended, which would incorporate this language. If that passes, you have the underlying motion as amended. So the first vote is on the amendment to the amendment, and then we'll take it from there and we'll explain the next vote once that vote is taken.
Okay, so to clarify,
I stand corrected.
if the amendment to the amendment passes, the 2% will be changed to 3%, and then we will vote on the 3% to be
To
added.
amend the original
Okay, thank you.
resolution.
Yes.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Seeing none, we will proceed to vote on the amendment to the amendment. Is everybody clear? We're voting on the amendment to the amendment to change from 2% to 3% the levy increase. We'll proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, no.
Supervisor Boots with a no. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion fails. Now we're back to the amendment, and that was a 2%. So now we will have any further discussion on the amendment to put in 2% in the budget priorities. Any further discussion? Okay, is everybody clear that the motion now on the floor is the amendment to substitute a 2% into the language for the net new, or the maximum tax increase, levy increase? All right, everybody, we're ready to vote. We'll proceed.
Supervisor Boots, nay.
Supervisor Boots with a no. And we'll proceed. And the motion fails. Now to the motion on the table, the resolution establishing the 2024 budget priorities and guidelines as presented in your packet, Resolution 28-23. Supervisor Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to call the question.
Is there objection to question being called?
I object.
Objection, so that just requires now, is there a second to the question being called? Supervisor Vensky with the second. We will proceed to vote on the question being called. Question being called now terminates a 2/3 majority, terminates the debate on the issue.
Mr. Chairman,
Supervisor?
a rules of order question. I'm not quite sure how this would be addressed, but within our rules of order, is it permissible to call the question before any debate has actually occurred?
Yes.
Okay. Again, the question's been called, and we now will proceed to vote on the question. And that, okay, a yes vote with a 2/3 majority will end debate. A no vote, we will continue to vote if the no's succeed greater than 2/3. And so we will proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots with an aye, thank you. Supervisor Seibert, thank you. And we'll proceed. And debate is not ended. We did not have a 2/3 majority. We will be back. We're back at debate. And so the discussion, any further discussion on the motion to approve the resolution establishing the 2024 Budget Priority Guidelines, Resolution 28-23. Supervisor Shafinsky.
Thank you, Chairman. I will be voting a hard no on the resolution as it currently exists. And the reason why is last year, we got to the point of debating the budget late in the process, and we all said, wait a minute, stop. We have too much of an levy increase. So what we're trying to do here this year is actually set guidelines or policy direction for the administrator, for the county at large, so that we don't arrive at the exact same position as we did last year. I.e., we're sitting there in September and we're looking at, I'll make up a number. I'm not assuming that this is exact. I'm just going to say we're going to get to September and we all of a sudden we see a 5% or an 8% or some number that a large majority of the board says that's too much. And right now, what we have here is a resolution that is a blank slate. It's an open checkbook with no policy direction, and this board exists to give direction. And I don't think it's a due diligence of our job if we don't give the administrator direction. So I will be a hard no.
Supervisor Longenhan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just request HR Finance to provide a summary as far as the discussions that led them to arrive at these assumptions. I know that they were explained last month, and I know that we referred a group of recommendations back to HR Finance, but discussion is good, don't get me wrong, but remember the purpose of the committee is to hear these concerns when they formulate these recommendations. So if somebody, Supervisor Robinson, or somebody could give me some background as far as the path that led them here to develop these recommendations. And again, I have a real difficult time when you're talking about any sort of revenue lines, if you're in private business or if you're in the public sector, where you say that 6 months, more than 6 months really, into the future that we're going to assume that our revenues are going to be this. I mean, economists get it wrong all the time. So I think that we shouldn't limit ourselves. Again, if there is an emergency or something like that that comes up, and we're at a point where we cannot cut something because we are down to core services, if we're in that situation, what are our options? Borrow. And nobody wants to do that. So, Mr. Chair, if you would refer that to Chair of Finance, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Magically, the Chair of Finance is up next. Supervisor Robinson.
Thank you for that cue. This is a new process for all of us. Last year there were concerns expressed relative to the transparency of the process and the involvement of others. So we began the Budget 101, provided background information. We've been meeting with the committees and gone through the mandated programs and services that we have, the rates and the fees, asked you to prioritize those. So we're starting the process in a different manner this year. And we've engaged the county board early and often in an effort to try to avoid this year. We're modeling a lot of our behavior after what St. Croix County does. We are learning as we go, but we wanted to, in the establishment of the priorities, set certain parameters to give the administrator notice that these are what we want to do in terms of capital reserves. We don't want to go into the fund balances, and I suggested using ARPA dollars for some of those capital projects instead of that. In terms of employee compensation, we heard the concerns raised a month ago, and we put a 3% maximum increase in there. And in health insurance, we want to maintain the quality, but we also want to deliver or evaluate delivery options, which I know Supervisor Marshall's been very concerned about. So we're embarking on that in an effort to try to hold down not only the compensation cost, but the package cost. We wanted to, we basically said we don't want new positions unless they're fully funded through non-levy resources in an effort to try to control the size of the government. And then in terms of the operating expenses, we wanted to look for opportunities to increase our efficiencies, understanding that we are constrained by the levy limits issued by the state of Wisconsin and other factors, many of which are beyond our control, including what amount of general transportation aid we'll get and other things in there. But the thought was that we would use these to guide it. We had the issue of the nonprofits come up. We encourage all the standing committees with jurisdiction to make recommendations for those. We want to engage the committees early and often, but that these are the parameters under which the administrator will present or develop the budget to be presented to the county board and the finance committee on the same day in September. And we're hoping not to have a repeat of last year through your involvement at the committee level, looking at those services and levels of service, those fees and rates, and hopefully we'll have a better product at the end. But these priorities are meant to say how we're going to handle capital, how we're going to handle reserves, how we're going to deal with employee compensation and our benefit package, how we're dealing with positions, and how we're dealing with operating expenses.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Now we are back to the simple majority of the resolution establishing the 2024 budget priorities and guidelines. Resolution 28-23 requires a simple majority. We will proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots with an aye. Thank you. We'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Thank you. We'll move on to Infrastructure Committee, Human Resources and Finance and Property Committee, a resolution approving the hiring of a broadband service provider. Resolution 33-23. What is your pleasure? Motion by Vice Chair McEwen, second by Supervisor Vensky. Any discussion? Any discussion? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do think this service is needed. However, I was compelled by the Supervisor Baker bringing up that he essentially tried to add a position effectively doing the same thing with ARPA dollars and a limited time. So I will be supporting this, but I would also ask or encourage Supervisor Baker to bring back the suggestion that he had last year, as it appears to be similar in context and in manner. Thank you.
Vice Chair McEwen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. first of all, this resolution came forward to the infrastructure committee. We did receive information and an update from Supervisor Robinson and the CCIT Director Jerry Klein about this position. They have had a person who has taken a leave of absence and then decided not to come back because of maternity leave. So the position, if not approved here, is still being utilized, and there is staff time. CCI Director Jerry Klein's staff time is being used on this. So is a person in an administration office. So this service is being supplied by those individuals along with Supervisor Robinson. So it's adding a position, but like many people brought up, their staff time being utilized to this now because they did lose this position. To me, broadband is public safety. And I'm just going to go back 5 years. We had a Public Safety Committee meeting and Infrastructure Committee meeting, had a joint meeting at 212 River Drive with about 30, maybe 35 residents, rural residents, who came and was complaining to public safety and to infrastructure that they were not able to dial 911. They had no landline, they had no cell service, they had no broadband. To me, that's public safety. The most important service that any government entity can offer or should offer is public safety. So as far as this, approving this ARPA funds money of $57,000 and adding this position, I understand Supervisor Baker's comparison, and like I said, that's for another day. However, there is staff time being utilized on this. We're not saving any money by not approving this position, and I'm sure Director Jerry Klein from CCIT has put a lot of time into this. This position is going to be supervised by Jerry Klein, and like I said, it's a lead person now. We do not have that for Marathon County for the broadband. There is significant numbers of money coming into the state. It was talked about $800 million to $1.1 billion, and this person's responsibility would be for applying for those grants and doing the mapping because of all the misconceptions about service in rural areas that really does not exist. And like I said, this broadband is more important right now. Not that it's not important to everybody, but it's more important to rural individuals because most of the people in the metro area have Charter or TDS or other services that they get broadband and internet and cell coverage. They don't have it out there in these rural areas, and they still don't. And I know there was a couple supervisors that are here that were at that joint meeting, and it was very concerning that you had people that could not dial 911. I think that's a service, being a Marathon County resident, they should have. So I would ask you to support this position because it's going to be the lead position to get these grants that we need to assist these individuals that still do not have broadband. So please support this. Thank you.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to offer an amendment to the now therefore be it resolved on the last section, which it says currently which position is expected to sunset on December 31st, 2024. I would like to change that to which position shall sunset on December 31st, 2024. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson with the second. Okay, you just allow the clerk a minute. any discussion on the amendment? So Supervisor Dickinson made the motion and Supervisor Robinson made the second. Any discussion on the amendment? The amendment puts a sunset date, shall, instead of may, shall sunset on December 31st, 2024. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, let's proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. Got Supervisor Hardinger is stepped out. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Now, to the resolution as amended. Any further discussion? Supervisor Cavalli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like some clarification on what the broadband service provider's role is in all of this data collection and maybe, how they get out to the public and do their advertising. Thank you.
Supervisor Robinson, please.
If we knew with 100% certainty, we would have done it. But I think what we're envisioning is that this person would work with various groups and communicate with them and get them to do surveys and to be able to process that survey. And if we ever get the license through the FCC to do the bulk challenges, that person could coordinate that. Those bulk challenges, working with Preston at Conservation Zoning and Planning in the geos, technical issues, and do those, hopefully making us eligible in areas that don't appear to be eligible for funding going forward. We know that there are companies that have stated that they serve, for instance, the Eau Claire Dells Park. The companies we've never heard of, and they're saying that they serve it. We need to be able to challenge that data so that isn't holding up a grant application. So they will be working with that, and they will be communicating with the Towns Association, local officials, schools, nonprofits and others to get them out to get that better data. Also, this person will be, in working and taking that data and hopefully working on coordinating bulk challenges so that we can make those areas eligible. We would also anticipate that that person would be engaged with the internet service providers. And, we've had very good working relationships with a number of them. We've partnered with many that have not been funded in the past. We would hope that we would be able to bring them back to the table. We hope that we'd be able to work with additional internet service providers to submit applications for the funding to serve those underserved areas. So it's looking at those individual or those tasks that we really have a critical time. And the reason I don't have a problem with the sunset is that we're in a planning stage right now. We've got the broadband equity and access deployment funding coming up, but we received $18,151 to do some planning, and we'll use some of that for this position, and then we'll use the ARPA dollars. But there really is a critical time frame where we have to do those challenges in order to be eligible for the funding going forward, and it's critical we get that information early and build it into a plan, and then we can work with the internet service providers to hopefully get their interest over the next couple of years to submit those applications.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Thank you, Chair Gibbs. So I would like some clarification on use of ARPA. About 5 minutes ago, we passed a resolution that says we're going to use remaining ARPA for capital needs. Now we are voting on a resolution where we're going to use ARPA for not capital needs. So is this a one-time exception? Are we going to also be voting on ARPA funds for other things, or could use some guidance on that? Thank you.
Administrator?
don't know if my answer is going to be helpful. It's your budget. If you amend it to use ARPA money for certain things with a 2/3 vote, the ARPA money goes for that. As administrator, I will do all I can to affect your will. That's all I have.
I was looking more for guidance from someone in HR Finance.
Chair Robinson?
I think the intent of that was to use ARPA for the capital projects versus using our fund balance going forward. I think we're also in the process of reconciliation of trying, and we hope to have a report for you in July. We have committed 21 million of ARPA funds. We will not be spending that 21 million. We want to look at that. So there may be applications. I know that there, depending upon what happens in the legislature relative to the nursing home reimbursement issue at Mount View, I think we may have some additional needs at North Central to pay for due to the shortage associated with the reallocation of the supplemental aid. But I think, again, the thought behind number one in the capital reserves was that we would use ARPA in lieu of using fund balance.
Any further discussion?
A follow-up question.
Supervisor Baker, please.
Was there any consideration of using contingency funds to pay for this position?
We chose ARPA because very clearly one of the eligible activities under the ARPA was, in the area of infrastructure, was broadband expansion. We thought it was very consistent with the goals that were outlined by Congress when they adopted it within the Treasury guidelines, and therefore an appropriate use of those funds.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Supervisor Langenhan, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to make a comment on this, the resolution here, urge my colleagues here to support it. You all know that I am a proud advocate of rural areas. I represent 3 towns, and I've seen the good that investing in broadband can do. My own district last summer, I saw fiber installed along County Road N, and I was talking with an official from the town of Emmett. Just last week, it was talking about how Frontier is going to be making or doing some work within their community as well. And I think we as a county need to consider the work that's already been done. And I think, and I reflect about the work of the Broadband Task Force, and I'd like to thank the members that participate on that, besides myself, of course. I'm not here to pat myself on the back. But staff members, both past and present, although I think I would note that the past is primarily one of the reasons why we brought this position in front of you all. I should say why HR Finance has brought this position in front of you all, is because there's a capacity problem. And that gives me a little bit of anxiety, especially when we think about what the future is going to look like as far as fiber installation and broadband installation throughout the entire rural area. So as a rural, representative, supervisor, whatever you want to call it, I really do favor the idea of using $78,000 of grant funds to fund a position like this. I appreciate Supervisor Dickinson's amendment. This increases our accountability. The last thing I'll say is that I will be remiss, and can go on record now that I thanked Supervisor Robinson for something. Supervisor Robinson and Director Klein, for that matter, have put in a lot of work with this particular issue for the past couple of years. And if you think about it, Jerry, you're responsible for IT department for a county and a city. If you think about it for John, he's definitely gone above and beyond what you would expect out of a typical elected official. And that's good and bad. It's good because, there's somebody that's dedicated in that role for broadband. It's bad because, at what point do you say, as far as succession planning or the next man up, well, we don't have a very deep bench here, folks. So if something were to happen to either of these two, we need to make sure that there are investments in place so that when people are individual and putting broadband into our county, they have a lead person that they can contact with and coordinate with. So I think this is a good investment, especially for us rural folk, although I believe that the entire county will benefit from something like this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Supervisor Dickinson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So something we talked about on infrastructure when we were talking about strategic plan, we talked about broadband and we talked about this kind of education of the public. And we talked about it not being something that we should be delving into and digging into, but yet this position does that. If you look at in the 615 packet, we have the job description. It's not in this packet, but on the 15th, it says provide educational training at all libraries on how to find an ISP for your home, what speeds you might need, expected costs, best equipment solutions for tablets, laptops, desktops, smart TVs, how to apply for service if they're eligible for subsidized service. So, okay, so what is the position? Is it going to be dealing with the state? Is it going to be trying to figure out what these maps are? If you look at those maps, and we did an infrastructure, and they talk about how you really zoom down and you get into a street level on these little hexagons about who has service. And you click on it, and then it might show that you have 4 or 5 different service providers, but you really don't. How is one person going to dig into 100 some odd thousand of those? Or is it all, how many, is it 300? Sorry. Is it 5,000? I mean, how many? It's the job that is within this description is well beyond 20 hours and 25 hours. I stated that the other day. One of the reasons I put in the sunset at the end of the year in 2024 is similar to what we did in the other position. We have to realize this position is going to be what is always happening. This is a full-time position, and that is going to come down the road at some point. Let's not be shy about that. That's what's going to happen. So just realize that, and it's going to be another board when it comes along anyway, and then they're going to say, well, the board voted for this position, even though the board didn't. So I think the work here is too much for this position. I don't think that this person is going to deliver what it says. I think the person's going to need to do a lot more than the 20, 25 hours, and I just don't see it. So I'm going to vote no. Thank you.
Supervisor Stravinsky.
Thank you, Chair. Speaking as somebody who is decidedly not representing a rural area, but rather a metro area, I also stand behind this particular resolution. And the reason that I do is very well laid out both by Supervisor Langenhahn and also by Supervisor Robinson. And the real crux of it is that we do not have a good understanding that we can present to the federal government, FCC, as far as what the true state of broadband is throughout Marathon County. We know that within the quote-unquote metro areas where it's economically feasible, broadband companies have expanded. Out as you get away from the metro areas where the population density starts to become a bit more troublesome in terms of an economic case, that's where our broadband both starts to lessen, weaken, and also that's also where we don't have a good understanding of what the coverage truly is, and we can't challenge the FCC maps because we don't have the data. Is this particular position perfect? No, but it is a step in the direction of at least getting better maps and being able to challenge the situation going forward so that we can get a bit more grant money to be able to move forward with our providers and expand. So I will be voting for it, and I urge everybody else to do so likewise.
Supervisor Langenhahn, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And like I said earlier, I think that there's a danger in generalizations. So I guess my question would be possibly for the administrator. When we have casual positions like this, and it could be filled by an employee, or in this case, the resolution also notes a contractor as well. When we have these casual positions that come up, how many of them have morphed into full-time or a full program? Because I know that's gotten brought up a lot since Thursday. I can't think of any on my time on the board, and I know, Administrator, you've been, the administrator for only a handful of years, but I really can't think of one, and I'm struggling with that claim. That might happen at a different level of government, but at the county level, we do a pretty good job of scrutinizing any new position or requests that come in front of us. That's been the case since at least I've been on the board, and I'm going into my 10th year. So, Mr. Chair, if you'd refer that to the administrator, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
I'd ask the administrator to respond to the question, please.
It would be foolish to say that my bosses do a poor job of scrutinizing anything I bring forward. So, with respect to the question, have we had positions that, absent a funding source, I guess I'll take your question this way, absent a funding source, kind of what happens? Do they go away? Absent a funding source, we don't fill them. The most recent example of that, if you recall, in the 2023 budget, there was an allocated position actually within Corporation Counsel's office for a part-time property lister position. There were insufficient funds within the budget to essentially hire for that position, so it went unfilled. We've had similarly positions that we've utilized contractual services for. So through your budget process, you would allocate funds to individual departments for contractual services. If there's neither a need for the position from the judgment of the department head and myself, we don't fill those positions. Or secondly, if the funding goes away, certainly we don't fill those positions. Or if the funding goes away while the position exists, the individuals within those positions are let go. Probably the easiest example that's coming top of mind is within the health department. We had a considerable amount of funds, relative to the pandemic that were utilized for contractual staff, and as need for those staff changed, we downsized. I don't know if that answers your question. I'm not aware of any. I know there was a request when I was the deputy administrator to take what had been a position within conservation planning and zoning that we'd historically funded through contractual or casual funds to convert that to a full-time position, but my recollection of that discussion at the full board was that it was not approved through the budget process. But again, that predates me in this current role.
Mr. Chair, follow up then?
Follow up, please.
And to clarify, of course, there is a stark contrast to if a casual position, we're using that term a lot tonight, sunsets, and if there is an open position that's already had funds allocated towards in, say, another department. I know the county does that. If there was a temporary employee, casual employee, and a position that was already allocated for, that person's talented, we want to retain them, so we put them in a place where they can use their talents. Correct?
I would, with one caveat to that explanation, the answer is yes. We have people apply for those positions. Very rarely do we not openly advertise a position. But yes, if we have an individual, the example previously that Vice Chair McEwen used with kind of an individual, a special projects person that we had within administration, that was funding that was made available by the fact that I was recruiting for a deputy administrator, and I went through recruitment, and I didn't feel comfortable moving forward with a final selection from that candidate pool. That said, we had a great deal of work that the county board had identified through the work plan to move forward. So we utilized some of the allocated FTE funds for a casual part-time position to move forward that work while we came up with a new recruiting plan for the deputy administrator position. Once we moved forward with that recruitment, the casual position went away. There were not funds to do it. I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Administrator.
Supervisor Overbeck.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I look at this as a continuing the expansion of the broadband and creating opportunities as far as the economic development. So I see this as a kind of a drop in the budget. Right now, I'm working remotely to another city. And with that broadband access, I have full access to video and video conferencing like I am there. And I think that can open up a whole new job market within Marathon County in that a lot of people are working remotely. It solves childcare in some cases. It solves a lot of issues. And I think without broadband, if I were to move to some place outside that did not have it, I'd be lost. I need that connectivity to keep going. And I think you're going to see that in the rural areas, as far as even farming or all of the different things that use the computers and internet access to research or connect. So I am going to support this and hope it continues, and this person can be an advocate for promoting that expansion of some needed services, just like a telephone or whatever. That's what the internet has become, is you can't live without it. So thank you.
Supervisor Cavelli.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I appreciate the amendment to the resolution from Supervisor Dickinson with the sunset clause. I initially was on the fence and going to vote no for this, but Supervisor Robinson knows that, and he hears from me, a few times over the past year about some of my constituents reaching out to me and concerned about the broadband and internet access and being able to communicate. So, a lot of the concerns that Supervisor Dickinson had, I also have. And thank you for the clarification earlier on the position. I would really like to see this position really hammer home and get that funding and those maps finished so we can get internet access out there. I'm in the last neighborhood going west where Charter spectrum is available. Anything past my subdivision is dead in the water. So I would really like to see that position push hard on getting that completed and before the sunset. And so I'll be supporting this. Thank you.
Supervisor Hardinger.
Thank you, Chair. The administrator brought up a good point when he was speaking up there before. Has any consideration been given to using an outside professional consulting firm rather than bringing somebody in here and hiring them?
Supervisor Robinson.
We've looked at a large number of options, including use of North Central Wisconsin Regional Planning Commission. They're providing some services to other counties. One of the options, the service provider option, it's written in such a way that it could be an employee or it could be a contractor. The problem with contractors is getting their attention and getting their focus and getting them to really get in, and their cost per hour tends to be much higher. So your bang for the $75,000 would be less, but it's not off the table. It's going to be it'll be a reach. No matter if we hire or if we contract, but we can look at that if they're available, but they tend to be much more expensive. We have in the past used consultants relative to our broadband efforts. Ellert's in 2008 and Design 9 and others, and it's nice to have that person be here and have a presence and be able to work with those parties. One of the critical roles that they'll play is we can't apply for those grants. We have to work with the internet service providers to apply for them, and we can support them. And having that presence here is important. But it's one of those options on the table.
But if we're hiring somebody, we're not going to take that option.
Well, it's written in terms of a service provider, and it gives, if we can't hire someone, we can contract for someone.
But do we have bids from contracting firms? You have specific things that you have to apply for by a certain deadline. Is that something have we asked firms what that would cost if it's $15,000, $20,000 to have the information that we need processed and brought back to us by that deadline?
The problem is that we've got a dynamic process where there will be ongoing needs as we look at those maps. It's not likely to be a one-time activity. It'll be an activity over time, because you need the data, the speed test data, and you need other information. Jerry has a preference for contractors. I have a preference for an employee, just based on past experiences. So I think we'll look at what the best way to do it. But the service provider is written in a way that we could do either, which is most advantageous, and the person can get in place as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Langenhahn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My third and final time. I don't care if it's employee or a contractor. Just get it done. Thanks.
Supervisor Vensky.
I call the question.
Is there any objection to question being called? Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Shafinsky. There is no debate. We will proceed to the vote on the question being called to end debate. And I just need to provide a little bit of opportunity for my clerk to type in the change. And is everybody clear? A vote yes with a 2/3 majority will end debate on the creation of the resolution approving and hiring of a broadband service provider. Everybody clear? We will proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. Debate has been ended, and we will proceed to vote on the motion, underlying motion, and that is the resolution approving the hiring of a broadband service provider. This does require a 2/3 majority. It is Resolution 33-23. Everybody clear on what you're voting on? As amended, as amended. Are we clear? Proceed to vote.
Supervisor Boots, aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you. And we'll proceed. And the motion is carried. It is not unanimous, but it is clearly 2/3 majority. Moving on to Environmental Resources Committee and Human Resources Finance and Property Committee, a resolution to amend the 2023 capital improvement project list to add Phase A closure of Bluebird Ridge Recycling and Disposal Facility. Resolution 34-23. This also requires a 2/3 majority vote. And what is your pleasure? Motion by Supervisor Mask and seconded by Supervisor Ritter. Any discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to vote. Supervisor Boots?
Aye.
Supervisor Boots, aye. Thank you, and we'll proceed. And the motion is carried and it is unanimous. Thank you. Moving on to announcements and/or requests. I-19, any announcements and/or requests? I do have announcements. I need signatures. Clerk needs signatures from HR, Finance and Property, Public Safety and Infrastructure. Any other announcements and/or requests? One other announcement that I have is announcement to all of the board members, and that is the end of the quarter is now here. June 30th is the end of the quarter, and so mileage reimbursement requests are due by July 15th for the second quarter, for any miles traveled on the second quarter on behalf of county business. Thank you. And with that, we are down to the famous motion. Supervisor Vensky with the motion, Supervisor Langenhan with the second to adjourn. All those in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. We stand adjourned. The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone.